I hope one day to get to a stage where people compliment trans women by saying, "Wow, you're so beautiful," instead of saying, "Wow, you're so brave."
The Change Podcast. Everything changes, everything stays the same.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Change, first episode of the new podcast.
I'm Shane, and I'm a theology and ethics professor, also a bit of an expert in disability. And I'm sitting here with my daughter.
My name is Jem. I am a PhD student in psychology and a pre-hormone trans woman. So early in my transitional journey.
So the first podcast we're going to be doing, maybe the first few, is to be talking about change, specifically the transition here of Jem. If some of you know us, it might be a little bit of a surprise. You might know Jem as Jeremy.
Well, not those who know me well. I have come out to a lot of people by now, but yes, I'm sure it still is quite shocking to a lot of people, especially seeing me in my new form.
The name Jem, it's a feminine name, but it's actually got a long history. Ellie and I picked that name because we loved a book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and
Classic.
it's a great book. Recommend it. One of the main characters' name was Jeremy, and they shortened it to Jem. And we actually liked the name at the time because we liked the shortening. Australians shorten names. What did you think of that name for most of your life, Jem?
It has been a journey. Initially, as a child, I quite liked it. It was a fun shortening of Jeremy. It was unique. I then had a bit of conflict with it when I was going into my teenage years, as I guess I was very anti-feminism due to my own little repression battle, and so for a little while there, I didn't actually like the name Jem. And within the last year, since I have opened up to this inner self within me, I have realized that I have always been Jem. And it's really nice to come back to.
Yeah, it's good. For sometimes when you've got to change names, it's a difficult journey. But for Ellie and I, at least, this is quite simple. So we've pretty well always called her Jem. Even when no one else was allowed to, he was kind enough, or he then was kind enough to allow us to do it. So
the name is the easy part. It's the pronouns that are a bit more difficult.
Yeah, we're all adjusting, and no doubt during the midst of this podcast, you're going to see that adjustment when actually both of us get that wrong occasionally.
Old habits die hard, and I often misgender myself. So to anyone out there who is writhing in guilt for misgendering a friend or people online, it happens all the time. And as long as you're trying, we love you. It's all good.
So today's podcast, really, we're just going to start talking, I guess, about a little bit of history, where this has come from. We're also going to touch on the question, why? Why is this happening? And I guess I'll preempt the answer by saying there's no answer to the why question, but it's at least worth asking so you can realize there's no answer.
Spoilers alert. There are no spoilers. There's no climax to this. It's a bit anticlimactic, but it's a great journey to go on, and one that's been very confusing for myself, coming to accept that whys are unanswerable often.
Yeah. So I guess we might, the recent history, I guess, is just to simply note that maybe about a year and a half ago now, Jem sat down with Ellie and I and the family and talked about his desire then to be gender fluid. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to Ellie and I at that point in time. How long ago was it now?
Yeah, I think it was probably about a year ago, maybe just over. Yeah. I guess I had to explain to my parents why, for the foreseeable future, I would be arriving home wearing a different breed of clothing.
Yeah, it was a surprise, but not a complete surprise to us because there was some history there, and so I guess we should start talking about that history. Uh, when can you remember, what's your earliest memory of, I guess, some confusion or uncertainty, or at least that desire uh, to be feminine, to be a woman?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good initial question, I guess, also because the stereotypical idea of what trans people's history are is that they all would walk around in high heels at their home and dress girly. And I had a little bit of that, although most of my childhood was quite masculine, boyish. Yeah, but my earliest memory would be maybe when I was about 5 or 6. I have a few memories, and it's hard to put them in chronological order, but I do remember being quite young and having this inexplicable desire to try on my mum's bras. And I did that a few times and I really enjoyed it. But, you know, there was a bit of a mixed reaction from, I think, mum more so. She was like, yeah, this is fun and games, but also maybe take them off before too long.
Yeah, look, I mean, Ellie was always a creative dresser, loved to dress the boys up and put makeup on them. She did actually always secretly want a daughter. She was a little bit disappointed that she had three boys. She loves her three boys dearly, but every time she'd do a gender reveal, is it going to be a girl? Is it going to be a girl? And well, we didn't get that at that point in time. So she was she was always very open to different dressing. She was makeup, but I think she was just worried at those early times that you'd be treated or bullied, or so it was more, I guess, fear for the way in which you might be treated if you're wandering around with a bra, for example.
Yeah, I guess it is a reasonable fear given the time period that we were in the early 90s. Sorry, late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, I guess it's also worth noting that we have, and we're Ellie and I are still Christian. Um, Gem not, and we can talk about that journey at some podcast in the future. But we were
Another
more
change.
conservative Christian at that point in time. Although, we were pretty open Christians for most of our kids' childhood. So we would have been um, certainly gay friendly and, inclusive. But uh, the trans thing wasn't on our mind really. So did you experience from us any unintentional on our behalf sort of shaming about that?
It is definitely hard to point to any direct incidences of it. I think more so we lived in a culture of gender conformity, and so a lot of the influence was very indirect. Um, in a lot of ways, you guys were quite encouraging in the opposite direction because, as you said, Mum used to love putting face paint on us and makeup, and I often got dressed up as a flower girl or some kind of fairy. Also, dinosaurs. So there's a
Yes,
good
kangaroos, plenty of
variety.
variety.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I guess the desire to wear feminine underwear was pretty hidden to me, and it didn't actually become apparent for me until I had my accident in 2010, and you would have been 15 then,
15.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so that was 15. But actually, this had been a part of your history for really the 10 years before that, and I was unaware of that. I think Ellie had noticed it a few times, but yeah, so it had been actually quite continual through there.
Yeah, I was pretty good at playing it off. I think I blamed Jacob, my middle brother, a lot, and so Mum might have been a bit more suspicious of him than I. But yes, I did get caught in quite an embarrassing way for a teenager at the age of 15. While Dad was in hospital, we moved up to Sydney for 8 weeks, living in Coogee, one of the fun summers of my life because it was the first time that I was capable of going out on my own on public transport and having access to a lot of different shopping centers in close proximity. And so I was then able to go and spend my Christmas or birthday money or pocket money on underwear at bras and things at a shop in East Gardens. And yeah, there was one afternoon where it was a small flat that we were in, not a lot of privacy. Mum ended up walking into the room as I was going through the stuff that I had in a bag, and I quickly threw it under the bed. And that whole awkward moment, Mum's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "It's nothing." And she's like, "No, show me." And so, yes, very ashamedly pulled out my bag from under the bed, and it was a very brief conversation.
She'd
Mum was
spent
like,
you'd spent quite a few $100s, like, it was quite a bit of pocket money you'd spent on that.
I don't think it was a few $100s. I didn't have that much money, but I did. It was a sizable sum for me, well spent at that age, because I suddenly had my own stash instead of mum's stuff. um, and yeah, mum just asked me, "What's this for?" And I was like, "Well, I just enjoy wearing it." Um, and that was kind of the end of the conversation, really. I think she took it off me, confiscated it, and then we went into the hospital that evening, and I had a chat with mum and dad, and you both asked me what it was. The difficulty at the time was my own lack of insight into what was going on for me. I was just a young teenager doing things that I enjoyed, and I hadn't really had the freedom to explore it further than it being a guilty pleasure in private. And so I didn't really know how to answer their questions. One of the questions they asked me was, "Are you gay?" And I said, "I don't think so. I think it's different to that." Uh, and then they were like, "Maybe you," yeah, I think you guys gently suggested that I stop because of the bullying risk. And also, I guess, ideas of maybe it being a fetish that would get out of control.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, as I said, by this stage, I did come from a conservative Christian background. So, but by this stage, I'd finished a PhD, studied ethics, and I was completely gay accepting. But it just did not occur to me that what was going on here was a potentially uh, a gender issue, was a trans issue. In our minds, it was probably a sexual fetish, and we were just unsure at that age whether that was smart or healthy. So we just said, look, we don't think this is probably a great habit to be getting into at that age. And I guess it just wasn't also clear to us that actually this habit had been going on, or this practice had been going on for 10 years, and that it was actually a much bigger deal in Jem's mind than it was to us. So we basically confiscated them, which, I mean, parenting is difficult, by the way. You're just trying to do the best thing by your kid. You're trying to love the kid, trying to guide them. Obviously, in retrospect, that was not the right response, but um,
But how could you know? It's one of those things. It was quite a damaging response to me because it did force a lot of this stuff very, very far below the surface again. It was like another reminder that these feelings that I had were not socially acceptable and that they were in need of psychological treatment because you guys asked if I wanted to see a psychologist, but I was just too mortified. Um, but yeah, the truth is no hard feelings for you guys. I do understand the role of parent is as a shepherd, and the shepherd doesn't always understand everything that's going on for its sheep.
yeah, you can only respond uh, as yourself at that point in time. I guess what was really interesting was when Jem came to us about gender fluidity a year and a half ago, he sat down and talked about this story and the trauma that had come from that story for him, from the suppression of it. it was quite confronting actually as a parent to sit back and think about um, how you'd damaged your kid um, at a really vulnerable point in time. And it was actually made more complex, I should add, because I was in hospital trying to deal with a spinal cord injury. So we did have a fair bit going on at that time. And I think also as a consequence of that, we did let it slip through our minds too easily. Um, and actually, then it just, I think we might have found undies once or twice after that, but we really just didn't think enough about it. And so Jem then was left with this response, which was to bury it and to feel the shame of it. And there's nothing like repression and shame, yeah, to have an effect on you. So it was really quite
Mm,
difficult 10 years later, or yeah, might have been 10 years, 9 years later, to realize that you've psychologically harmed your son at that point.
yeah.
So anyway, all you can do is face your mistakes, learn from them, and continue to love your kid. Once you've done that, yeah. I mean, the good thing is we've never not loved each other, despite the fact that we've unintentionally damaged,
Well, the key word
damaged
there
him.
being unintentional. It was never malicious.
Yeah,
So yeah, and it's also a good thing for the child to be able to reflect and not take it, uh, as malicious. Be understanding of the parents so that they can forgive too and heal that within themselves.
is there anything else you'd share about that gap then between that period and when you then came out, or not? It wasn't really coming out. We're talking about gender fluidity. Any other experiences you'd like to share about that?
Yeah, well, it never really ended. After that point, it just became more shameful for me, and yeah, I think from that point, it started very much being this battle of me fighting against my desire to do that and really trying to change myself a lot. So I went through these, I guess, binge and purge patterns with it, where I would, for a period of time, really enjoy it and go out and buy clothing and stuff again and play around with it. And then I would decide, no, this is bad. I don't want to be doing this, and throw out everything, maybe stay strong for a few months and then end up doing it again. So it was a very repetitive cycle. I had a girlfriend, my high school sweetheart, for 3.5 years, who towards the, I think, yeah, fairly early in our relationship, I told her about um, these feelings that I had. And I guess I very much omitted my keen desire for it and explained it as a past feeling that I had, trying to reduce some of the anxiety in myself. And she was accepting of it in my history, but expressed that she didn't want me to keep doing it. And that was another rejection, I guess. And so,
And
um,
again, she's just responding out of what she knows.
yeah,
Yeah,
you start dating a male,
yeah,
and then you find out that they enjoy cross dressing. It's confusing,
yeah,
and so I can understand that as well. The lesson in that is present your true self when you meet someone, so you don't
yeah.
have to deal with these. Then coming out to someone and them having to learn who the real you is. There's definitely a power in authenticity there. But yeah, so that was another incident. Yeah, there was a period after that where we were in limbo for a while, and she was a lot more accepting because I had wanted to break up with her, and so I think in a attempt to be accepting and try and maintain the relationship, she had opened up to exploring these things with me for a bit of time, and then at some stage, I guess I just kind of found out that she was just doing it to keep me around, and I felt pretty shitty about that. And so, um,
Yeah, look, I'm gonna defend her. These are complex times and relationships are difficult when you're going through
yeah, yeah, and
concept times.
no
So
attack on
yeah,
her at
yeah,
all.
yeah,
Just speaking
yeah,
from my own experience, it's,
yeah,
it is still a subtle reinforcement of
yeah,
how I was feeling, which was that no one is ever going to truly love me for
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Um, and that's a really hard thing to face. When, yeah, it was such a strong feeling in me where I really felt most myself when I felt feminine. And yeah, then it got to a stage where when I finally ended things with her after a few years, I told myself, okay, this isn't me. I'm going to just completely let go of this. I'm being fully masculine from here on out. I then dated another girl for uh, a few months and then went on that, typical singles journey of trying to have meaningless connections with people and build up my account of sexual conquests. And I wouldn't say that that was a particularly meaningful period of my life. Um, Although it was something that I guess I felt like I needed to do because of the social circle that I was in. And it was very common for people around my age at university to be quite promiscuous. Um, and I guess I had internalized this lesson that people needed to go through that to learn about themselves. Um, and it really didn't make me happy until I met my most recent girlfriend, um, who we dated for 2 years. After about 7 months, I opened up to her about this side of myself, very much as a like looking into the past type thing, because in this case, it truly was. I had, in all conscious respects, removed this desire and was living as a man. And she was actually really, really great with hearing it and so accepting. I was so anxious telling her, and she kind of really minimized my anxiety by just saying, "What are you worried about? This doesn't matter. It's just clothing. Why is this a big deal? You don't need to be anxious about this," which is a great, very, very powerful message.
Mm.
She was like, "Are you sure you don't want to keep doing it?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm sure." And so still didn't really get into it for a few months until I can't remember how it came up, but at one stage she encouraged me to experiment with it again with her. I think she was curious and just wanted to make sure that I was truly happy and being my most authentic self. And a few months into that, I had an interesting, I don't know, I will say the word spiritual experience because it was doing Wim Hof breathing, which is a very powerful breathing technique.
I was going to say a very masculine breathing technique, but that might be unfair. But
Yeah,
he's sort of your ultimate man, Wim Hof, isn't he?
he is. It's very much the yang of spirituality through using intense breath control to control your autonomic nervous system. Um, but yeah, very interesting stuff. So I was doing that and kind of like felt this deep energy in me of like self hatred and anxiety and unacceptance and like rejection. And there was areas of my body that um, I couldn't bring my conscious awareness to without feeling discomfort. And typically, sorry, centered around mostly the bottom, which for a male, I guess a lot of men would understand this, like this feeling that if you enjoy feelings around your bottom, then you must be gay, which is, an outrageous notion that any part of your own body would be off guard. But I had, sorry, out of bounds. But yeah, I had this sudden realization that there were areas of my body that I didn't feel comfortable going into, and just feeling, and that really struck me as bad, for lack of a better word. And so I started um, diving into those feelings of fear and anxiety, and realized that my internal self image was very much as a woman,
Mm.
uh, and it always has been, but because I had all these feelings of shame and disgust around being a woman in a man's body, that image was of this really gross trans woman who'd just been destroyed by life and rejected, and uh it really, yeah, freaked me out, I guess, seeing that. And thankfully, Jazz was there to hold me in that and to say, look, this self image doesn't need to be gross. It can be beautiful. Um, People will love you no matter what. And so that was the beginning of my journey of really opening up to myself. I then started, because I had never explored all of this stuff before. I thought it was just a clothing thing. I thought I just wanted to wear women's clothing. Um, and so I started cross dressing whenever I was in a more casual setting. Went op shopping. Op shops are amazing for finding clothes, getting a new wardrobe without having to break the bank. Um, and yeah, I kind of did that for about 9 months. It progressively became more and more into my daily life. That's when I came out to my parents. I told them I was just wanting to present more female, cross dress. And then
What were you expecting with that response, and did you get the response you were expecting or not? How was
in
that
communicating my
with
feelings to you guys,
yeah.
yeah. I think that given how open I have been able to be with you guys about every other area of my life recently, um, I I was scared of telling you guys, but not because I thought that you would in any way reject me, just because it's really hard to let go of those conditioned mindsets of weirdness to do with it. Like I just
Mm,
felt weird. I'm like, oh, this is such a bizarre thing to be telling people. Um, but I knew you guys would love me, and I was still quite surprised at the level of acceptance. Um, yeah, there wasn't like, in a lot of ways, you guys didn't even bat an eyelid. Particularly my brothers. That was what amazed me the most. I think I told them slightly earlier than I told you guys, just because we'd been hanging out in a context where I was gonna dress in
mm.
feminine clothing anyway, and so it had already come up with, definitely with Lachlan. Um, he was very much just normalized it for me. He was like, oh, cool, yeah. I mean, I did that when I was younger. Everyone wants to like experiment with dress and female clothing. It's fun, and you just love it more. So that's great.
Yeah. Tash and Jake were the same, and Sandy.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Very,
yeah, and look,
very much loved it.
it's it's just been interesting. There's still a trend. There's still a change there from then to actually deciding, yeah, that you want to become a woman, including, for example, and I think that's been a little bit of the challenge for Mum and I. It's not the dressing or it's that decision to say take the hormones and change the body.
Mm.
Um, and so for us, it's completely accepting and want to walk with you, but just also want to know that you've thought through it and are sort of aware of the pros and cons and the challenges. And
Yeah,
so so it's not an easy journey walking through that decision, is it?
not at all. Yeah, it's been a harrowing journey. Um, finding the right path amidst a million thoughts for either side. I'm a very, very big hyper analyzer of everything.
It's one of your major problems in life. You overanalyze, but maybe that's been important for this journey.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important for this journey, and potentially of use to a lot of other people who are going through the same thing. I did get a chance to uh, utilize some of these musings in a trans support group fairly recently, where a lot of people were expressing thoughts similar to thoughts that I had gone through, and I could provide them with different ways that I had worked through those
Mm.
issues. So
Well,
it is
just
beneficial.
it's interesting because we've been describing the what, and we haven't really touched on the why. Um, and I'd like to think that it's not because you were abused or, um, and because that hasn't really been your experience apart from once you already were having these experiences, some trauma that resulted from the response? But it's
Mm.
interesting the assumption that there's sexual abuse driving these sort of changes, and that's not the case for you, or
No, yeah,
yeah,
I haven't had any sexual abuse to explain this, and there's been no real significant point in my life that I could point to say, "Oh, yeah, this is the reason why I now want to be a woman." So that's why it's been
yeah,
so confusing. It's just kind of been this, you know, subtle layering to my experience all the time of a desire for feeling feminine, and it's even hard to express that really clearly as to what that means. Um,
yeah, because we've talked about this, a- and in part, um, the response is, well, then why don't you just be, what is feminine? And we've talked about it. Well, the feminine is, more soft, or what? I mean,
More soft, more like receptive, creative. Um, yeah, I mean, there's
and
lots of
yet,
different notions.
and yet, when we were talking about this the other day, Jem became a little bit upset um, because we were trying to find out the why, and when we're doing that, um, often the reason you want to know the why is so you can find a reason to cure it or to fix it or to change it. And it's so what became apparent is as we were trying to find out the why, because she is saying that, and then I'm saying, well, why don't you just be more feminine, more receptive as a man? Because you can be. There's nothing. Of course, men can and should be more receptive, more kind, more loving. All of those things that we traditionally ascribed to femininity. And so we were exploring these questions, and Jem became upset. And it was because, not because all of that wasn't true, but because it actually felt like we weren't really just accepting you. It was the question why almost became another form of rejection. And that wasn't our intent at all. It was
Mm,
just to try and understand. But I've actually become much more content with with the beauty of the idea that you actually don't need to explain this thing.
yeah, the why can be really overwhelming because, I mean, I spend 90% of my day pondering on the why, and it's this roller coaster of cognitive activity where I'll go up one ladder and then hit a point. I'm like, oh, but what about this? And then I go down, and then I'm like, well, what about this? And then I go back up, and um, it's really confusing. And I guess the in the why it feels like there's this pressure to make other people fully understand you so that they do accept you. And it feels like in a lot of ways, why do you need that? But it is still an interesting thing to unpack the why, and I think it'd be productive to go through and maybe toy with some of these ideas.
Yeah, we might do that at some point in these podcasts, talk about gender. We might even have a look at some of the literature on explanations for
Mm,
tran, but we don't want to get lost in that because I think, and certainly don't really want to go any further than that here because I think the point is who cares about the why when what matters is let's accept you as you are and let's want you to be happy. And for you, this has not been an overnight decision to suddenly become trans. In
mm,
fact, it's really clear that this has been a long term desire. And so going on this journey is about self acceptance.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And so I guess to maybe resolve some of those listeners who are still lingering on the why being important, if I could express my journey in coming to self acceptance over the last little period of my time. Because, I have, so the reality is that all through my teenage years, I had thoughts of wanting to transition. There were nights where I stayed up for hours on end praying to God that He would make me a girl. Um, to no avail because God doesn't work in direct ways. Um, but he did put me in an era in which it is possible to become a girl. So yeah, just pointing out some of the miracles that happen. But to get back to the point, yeah. So there has always been this desire in me, even in my early 20s when I was really trying. Even when I personally viewed it as nothing more than a sexual fetish because I didn't get it more. Um, I still had moments of being like seeing other trans women and being like, oh my God, I just wish I could do that. And not really understanding it because I didn't let myself explore it. And so it's only been within the last year that I have been really diving into these feelings in myself. And I guess I wanted to, over the year, find an exact reason for why I was a woman so that I could remove all anxiety and all uncertainty about the decision and just do it. Or the opposite, come to a reason. This is why it happened, and so therefore I'm not actually trans. I'm just someone who had this happen to me, or felt this way, and this is something that I can address and still stay as a man. And so yeah, I really dove into this why question quite deeply, and without unpacking the whole logical analysis that I did. Emotionally, the journey was one of, discovering reasons for and feeling, like essentially it would be this strong feeling in me of freedom and happiness that I have and euphoria that I hadn't experienced before for being myself. This level of self-love when I would allow myself to feel like a woman um and then I would start to try and unpack that feeling and be like, okay, why do I feel this? And so then I would go down, any one of hundreds of different lines of logics from, Zen Buddhism as to why I shouldn't do it or anything like that. And very quickly I would start to feel really upset and, I would be lost in this like over analyzing state that just made me feel really crap about myself again. Um, and until, one of two things would happen. I would either find some logical way out of the little puddle of shame I was in and be like, oh, well, maybe this is what I could do. And then my feelings would start to rise again. Or I would hit a breaking point. And this happened a number of times where I, sat down to journal my thoughts because I was just so sick of this constant fluctuation in my feelings and mood. And, I had taken a break from my PhD to try and work through a lot of this stuff. And so I was doing this all day and it was just exhausting. And so I sat down and I would try to journal and I wouldn't have anything to say because I'd exhausted my linguistic analysis of these feelings. And I'd just get so exasperated and start to cry and just be like, what is going on? Why can't I write anything? Like, am I just broken? And essentially I'd hit this point where I don't have a word for where this place is, but my inner self, my true self, my higher self, my inner child, there's lots of different terms to describe this, but that would come out and it would just like stamp its foot and say, I am a girl.
Mm.
And in those moments, everything was easy. Everything would drop away. I would be, so centered and calm, and everything in my life made sense. All of the points of confusion and difficulty that I'd gone through in my life would just line up and I'd be like, oh yeah, true. This is me. I feel it. And then, I'd go the next day and I'd meditate and I'd really sit in that feeling. And I had some of the deepest meditations I've ever had in my life in that feeling of just perfect centered oneness. But no thought needed to happen, no sensation needed to happen. It all just was. And then I'd go home and suddenly start thinking about it again. And then I would lose that feeling and I would get absolutely lost in these narratives that from my ego of why I shouldn't or why I should, and it was literal chaos in my mind. Yeah, and just not even really productive. I never came to any logical reason for it. And in the end, essentially the conclusion I come to is that this is how I feel, and this is what makes me happy. And why would I deny that to myself? Um, and hopefully one day I'll be able to explain to people why. That'd be a great gift. But until then, it's still an exploration and a journey.
Well, I'm not going to ask you again anyway. So if you come to that explanation, you can tell me without asking.
Yeah.
I think we might leave it there almost on this podcast, and the next one we might maybe start to explore some of the practical side of the journey, including seeing a psychiatrist and some of it, because the point came where Jem went to a psychiatrist and went through the journey about starting to become trans. And I think we're going to talk about that and then do some podcasts periodically about the journey as it's going on. So we're starting this before the journey started. So is there anything else you
Yes.
want to, in fact, just, is there anything else you want to say now, but to finish? But before you do, I'm just going to ask a tangent question that's just been in the back of my mind that people might ask. So it's going to step back a bit, but underwear,
Yes.
that's just interesting. So, cause it wasn't full dress. So was it? Was it underwear because that was the easiest to hide, or?
Yeah, so it was full dress in a lot of cases. There were times when, mum left out a leotard tutu outfit and, I put it on, and then I got my brothers to put other ones on too so that I didn't look so weird. But yeah, it was, I guess the underwear thing is interesting to me because it started so young. And I think I remember seeing a Britney Spears music video, and she was wearing underwear, and I was like, "Ooh, I want to be like her." And so I'd gone to mum's room, and that was one of the first memories I have of wearing underwear, and it just probably developed that association where I could only feel these ways when I was wearing this underwear. And whenever I wasn't feeling that way, I was having to be this boy that everyone expected me to be. And so then, when it hits teenage years, um, a sexual side was added to that because I went through puberty and I discovered my sexuality, and I discovered that through um, wearing women's underwear. And
You felt sexy, and so
I felt
yeah,
sexy and I felt happy, and
yeah,
that's like, those are the times that you're the most turned on, is when you feel good about yourself.
yeah, yeah. No, that's
So
good. Sorry about that tangent, but
no,
I
it's
think
good to
I should
cover.
say it's this goes without saying. This is really brave conversation, Jem.
Thank you.
Because these are not topics we generally talk about and easily talk about, and then podcast or
Yes, it's definitely
um,
not a conversation I would very comfortably have with a lot of people directly. So the podcast setting is a great little level of removal so that I can dive into these things in a more comfortable place. But part of my hope with this in being so open about it all is just to normalize it, and hopefully we can get to a place in the future where it isn't brave to talk about these things, because it shouldn't be. It should be, we're all human, we're all having experiences, and we're so diverse. Why is one experience right and the other experience is wrong when both aren't harming anyone? Um, so, I hope one day to get to a stage where people compliment trans women by saying, "Wow, you're so beautiful," instead of saying, "Wow, you're so brave," because it is a subtle backhanded compliment in a way.
yeah. I'm crying now. I
Oh,
think let's finish and just say I love you so much,
oh, I love you,
and
though.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you so much. That's so nice. What a touching end. uh, well, I think we should. Yeah, I might be able to end it because
Please do.
you're a bit tied up. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the Change podcast. Over the next few episodes, real changes will be happening. So follow along for that journey.
Peace.
Peace out.